Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. Today we have 4 distinguished scholars, researchers, educators, mentors. These people are Jim Patrick from Texas A&M, Nancy McGee from Virginia Tech, Sarah Dolnikar from University of Queensland, and Robert Lee from Temple University. However, today they are here in the capacity of journal editors. So let us give them the round of applause. I think everyone knows that Jim and Nancy, they are editors-in-chief of Journal of Travel Research. Sarah represents Annals of Tourism Research, and Robert, Tourism Management. So before we start, I would like to explain how we are going to conduct this session. So this session will have 3 parts, roughly equal, maybe not much so, but almost. So we will start with the questions and issues of ethics in publishing and associated issues. So this will be the first part. The second, there will be questions which I will be asking our guests in turn. And these questions came from my own experience, from my talks with colleagues and with fellow researchers. And I hope that you will see the relevance of those questions to your own work as well. And finally, in the third part, we will have questions from the audience. So we have a microphone, and you will be addressing one of the guests to whom you would like to direct your question. So in order to be on time and finish everything, I will keep time. So if somebody talks too long, sorry, I will let you know. So with this, let us begin. And I will ask first Sarah to talk about plagiarism and self-plagiarism in publications.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. And yeah, just to reiterate, we feel really strongly about the topic of research ethics. So that's why we made it a little bit of a priority today. But we are most excited about question time. So please do write down all your questions. We really do want that interaction. And that's why we're going to try to keep the first 2 parts short and snappy. So plagiarism and self-plagiarism. Of all the papers I get as an editor on my desk, 30% consistently, that's over the past 10 years, 30% I have to desk reject because they're plagiarized. Now, how do I know they're plagiarized? Every paper I get on my desk comes with a plagiarism report automatically produced by the publisher. I open every single one of them. I do not look at the percentage score. And if it lights up like a Christmas tree, it's not going to pass. And it's going to be rejected on the basis of ethics. And the 3 journals represented here actually have an agreement. We said if we find cases of plagiarism, these papers are rejected with no opportunity to resubmit. And that's really important to us because that's just absolutely not acceptable. And now, not always is plagiarism intentional. So these are not people who are copy-pasting deliberately. Oftentimes, it's just not being educated enough, so I will see it in literature review tables, where there's copy-paste in the literature review, because that's kind of the summary of the literature, but that's not okay. It's got to be under quotation marks, right? You've got to cite it correctly for it not to be plagiarism. What is okay, and we had that conversation in the morning, if you have just published an abstract, that can be reused in a paper. Your thesis does not count as plagiarism, so that can duplicate. And preprints that you have put on an open access server, that's also acceptable. But other than that, it needs to be your text, not text copy-pasted from anywhere else. If you work with co-authors, that's a bit of a trap for players. That's happened to me. So I worked with people, I write everything, but turns out my co-authors didn't, right? So I would recommend to all of you, before you hit submit, run it through your university's plagiarism report just to convince yourself that you're safe. One last sentence on self-plagiarism. It's a debate we have all the time. So people have used, let's say, cluster analysis for 10 years. So they have this perfect paragraph on cluster analysis, and they just copy-paste it into every single paper. Unfortunately, that also is not acceptable, right? That is called self-plagiarism. If you really find no better words than that paragraph you've been using for the last 10 years, put it under quotation marks and cite yourself. That's, again, okay. But these are just really important things to keep in mind, because you don't want to be stopped in your publication tracks at the first turn, right? Because you get a desk rejection for plagiarism. That's it for me. I'll hand over back to Svetlana. Oh, no, hand over to, oh, God, glasses. Sorry. I need a different glass for every... authorship, Robert.
Sure. Thank you. Well, before I get started, in full disclosure that Professor Kathy Xu, who is the editor-in-chief of Tourism Management, planned to come, and she had to cancel the trip because of some emergency, and so I'm the sub. So sorry if you're disappointed, there's no refund, okay? So before talking about authorship, I want to kind of put everything into the context. The first thing is, just in case you're aware of 2015 and 2016, Bob McKercher and his co-author published something along the line of the rise of fractional authorships. Basically, they did some calculation and found that between 1980 to 2004, actually 2014, that the average authorship on a tourism paper has more than doubled. And to 2014 is about 2.5. A Scopus study around the same timeline said that, generally speaking, that in all science, the average authorship reached to about 3.5 to almost 4. What it means that basically on all the papers, not only tourism, but also outside tourism, on average, each paper carries more authors. This, Bob and his research team identify some issues of that. For example, like whether all the authors are contributing equally, what exactly is the job division, whether we are training our PhD student to be sub-scientist, what he called, meaning that I'm specializing in literary review, I'm specializing in conceptual development, I'm specializing in methodology. And there's a whole bunch of issues with that. Number two, along with this rise of the fractional authorship is this so-called age of complex authorship. During COVID, the world of publishing just saw the latest record-breaking paper. A paper about COVID has in the history, the most authors that we have seen. Guess how many on that one single paper? 15,025. 15,025. That's in natural science, in health, that they need to do a lot of cross-country, cross-discipline collaboration. But essentially what this illustrates in an earlier paper in Nature is this phenomenon of complex authorship, which basically is about a paper with multiple authors from multiple countries. And when a paper has more than 100 authors from more than 30 countries, they call that hyper-authorship. Once again, what it means to publishing. It means that maybe authorship means different things from in the old time that we think authorship means someone writing something. And this rise of fractional authorship and this complex authorship now begs the question about contribution issue. And then this is the ethical issue that we're dealing with, is essentially the non-contributing authorship. So what we have seen is there are papers that people in all kinds giving guest authorship, honor authorship, gift authorship, basically people who are not necessarily contributing substantially to a paper get the authorship, get the credit they don't necessarily deserve. So in some cases, they probably should be put in acknowledgement. In other cases, well, there are different kinds of treatment. But in all, that's in the tourism management system, we ask every author to use the credit system, which basically is about a taxonomy of each author's contribution, that you can categorize your contribution into the 14 categories that we listed. And we believe that this is something that we all need to be aware of, whether you are making a substantial contribution to a paper. Thank you.
And now, okay,
Oh,
you're all right, so I have, and now salami slicing topic. Yeah, salami slicing.
Howdy. They gave me the topic of salami slicing. It sounds much more awesome than it is. Salami slicing means that we take a data set and we try to produce as many articles out of it as we can. And this becomes highly problematic when we start with one research question and we slice it thin. So a lot of students, especially doctoral students, will do chapters in a dissertation that reflect independent articles. And this is much more appropriate. It means that you came out, you strategically designed research questions for multiple papers from the get-go. Normally, when we develop a data set, we have one research problem we're trying to solve. And salami slicing takes what could be a very impactful article and it waters it down greatly. And if you look at citation indices, so we're playing a game, we all are in this room. Some of us are old like myself, we don't have to play the game very much. Young people typically need publications and they need citations. And that's what drives salami slicing. If you look at articles that have great citation indices, they more than likely were not salami sliced at all. They were impactful, they had a good research question, they chose the perfect methods for that research problem, and they attacked it. And then they took all the data that we can. And I know I can speak for all three journals here that it's becoming more competitive to do a tier 1 article. We expect multiple data sets together, not one data set sliced. So good research suggests that we start with a good problem and we solve it with the data that we have. So be careful with your data. As you slice it thin, we all end up seeing the same articles. So when we see the same data set and we see the plagiarism report, we see the data was collected at the same place, the same number of subjects, we can see that you've sliced that data. So if you do that, please make sure you start with very unique research questions. Your models are unique in themselves, and that you're not having the same hypotheses across articles.
All right, back to me, I think, and my job is to talk about data retention. Now, that's something that in other disciplines is the norm. If you're going to publish an article that uses empirical data, they will expect you to have that data in a data repository that's accessible for replication. In tourism, that's not the norm yet. I think it should be the norm, but it's not. However, you have an ethical obligation to save the data you've used, because at any point in time, someone can come and they can say, we don't trust that these results are valid. In that case, that data set needs to be made available for replication. If it is not, the journal may well retract your article. I can give you a recent example at Annals. I don't think I shared it with you guys. We published an article, and then an anonymous reader contacted us and said, this is wrong, this is incorrect. We went back to the author. We said, can you clarify these things? The author said, no, I don't have the data anymore. And we said, well, that's a problem, right? Because we're going to retract your paper unless you can produce the data. So then a marvelous associate editor spent a good year back and forth with the authors, and it was all resolved in the end. But it is important to understand, you as authors, it is your obligation. It is not once it's published, it's all forgotten. You are obliged to have this data set optimally. If you're smart, in fact, you upload it on an open access repository. Why? Because then your data will create citations for you if other people are going to use it. But even if you do not wish to do that, it has to be available upon request, because your findings must be replicable and must be open to criticism in a contest of ideas and a challenging of ideas. All right, over to Nancy.
And I will add one quick addendum or addition to that. And for those of you who are engaged in qualitative research, we all know about audit trails, right? So you need to have that available and accessible as well in your transcription. So the data may be a little bit different, but you still need to be able to store it accordingly. All right, my topic is conflict of interest. You want to talk about a rabbit hole we can go down, but never fear, I will not. If you do even a quick perusal of the legalese around conflict of interest, it can get very complicated very quickly. There are 4 types of conflict of interest, and I'm not going to get into that or go down that rabbit hole. But I do think the definition is valuable, and that is a situation in which a person is in the position to benefit from actions or decisions made in their official capacity. So in some areas, that can be really important. And I think when we're in this little room and we're all around each other and we start feeling about how amazing we are in our world, we kind of forget that the reality is that we're, in general, with our work, not in the position, unless we've got our neighbor is, what's his name, Warren Buffett down the street, and in the position to make millions off of the work we do, okay? We do important work, but when you get out this door, there are a lot of players that make us kind of look like specks. So we for the most part, conflict of interest is not something we're going to make millions of dollars worth of. But it is probably, to me, I think the biggest thing we need to address is one of those 4 types is perceived conflict of interest. And maybe you're not really going to benefit from it, but somebody might think that you are if they discover it after the fact. If you've published something and they're like, well, wait a minute, this person is involved. So I think I will quote my colleague to my right here, who used the example of, say I own an Airbnb property and I do research on Airbnb. That doesn't mean I'm going to make millions of dollars off of it, but I do need to come forward and just, make that public so that people appreciate, okay, that person's engaged in that. And when in fact, that actually could make the research stronger, right? Because you understand what's going on in the process. And again, I'll allude to qualitative work. We talk about positioning ourselves. You explain as part of your research how you came about to study the group that you studied. Perhaps you sit on the board or you're involved with that. But that's an important part of the research, and it helps us, in fact, understand your perspective even more. And so having it public and just sort of declaring it in so many ways is more than half the battle. Also, for us as editors, we are careful when we get manuscripts that maybe we feel like there could be a conflict of interest. The way it works with Jim and I'll get one and say, for whatever, say it's a former PhD student, or say it's somebody I used to work with or I work with now, and I will hand it off to him and say, all I say is conflict of interest. I don't say conflict of interest, and he may know it's one of my former PhD students, but I have a lot fewer than him. He'll give me one, and he's got 11 million PhD students out there, and I don't know all of them, but he'll just say conflict of interest. And so that way I'll manage it, and we'll work from there. And that works for us as far as sort of the aspect of editors and co-editors. And if you go back and revisit our ethics policy that we sent out on TriNet a while back, you'll see that we kind of outline that and say if there's anything perceived with the editors or co-editors, we're upfront about it and we manage it accordingly. And if you, as an author, submit and don't say, oh, by the way, this doesn't need to go to so-and-so, then that conflict of interest goes on your side. So just be sure to be very open about it. So that one's the complicated one. And then I've got the last one, which is simultaneous submission, which is actually an easy one and a short one. And I will actually go right straight from our policy. A manuscript is submitted only to one journal at a time. If there's evidence of multiple simultaneous submissions, the paper will be desk rejected with no possibility to resubmit at any of the 3 journals. Here's the thing. If you multi-submit, we are a small enough little band of what are we, a band of...
Idiots?
Oh, no. Band of thieves. Thieves. Not idiots, thieves.
Oh, okay.
But we're a band that the odds of you getting, you submit something on community capital to Annals and Tourism Management, the odds of me getting both of those are probably pretty high when you've got to go 3 to each. And if I get both from 2 separate journals, how happy am I going to be about that? Not so much. So keep that, I mean, it's just dumb. Just don't do it. So I think that's the easiest way to describe that one in contrast to the more complicated one. So there endeth our ethics.
All right. So it was quick. So I recall that, yeah, we can give a round of applause. Yes, yes, yes. There was a question, since we have time, why you need to ask permission from a person to be mentioned in acknowledgements.
Yeah, that sounds like you want to give someone a bouquet of roses, but you have to ask them permission. But actually, the explanation is pretty logical, because people do a bit of name dropping, right? So if I put in the acknowledgement Daniel Kahneman, right, then everyone's going to go, oh my God, he gave a Nobel Prize winner, gave her feedback. Well, it's got to be a great paper, right? So you can't do it. You need permission of people who you put in the acknowledgements. I would advise that you do that in writing if there ever is any dispute. I served as the research integrity advisor at UQ for 6 years. And there have been disputes where people mention people in the acknowledgements, and that person was very unhappy to be mentioned, and it blew up into a major drama. So I guess what I'd like to say more broadly is every one of the publishers we work with have extensive ethics policies. It is the most boring thing you will ever read, all right? But it could just save your career. So it's well worth doing. You do not want to ever get caught up in any kind of ethics dispute.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we are going to the second part of this session. And the next question is actually for each of the guests. So considering large volumes of submitted manuscripts, which topics, study designs, methods are likely to be desk rejected? So do the journals, Tourism Management, ATR, and JTR have preferences for certain topics, designs, and methodologies?
I can start this, I guess. No, we have zero desires for different methods or different topics. We want great questions to be solved. We want good findings that provide implications to theory and practice. So you should choose the methods that best fit the problem that you're studying. So I don't know if Nancy or I have ever saw a topic that, if it was within the remote realm of JTR, that we're not excited about once the topic gets started, and we don't look at the actual methods unless they're the wrong methods for that problem. And I'll pass this way.
They've got that. What he said.
You want to go next? Yeah, I'll go next. So, I mean, we're the same. We're no a priori preferences or dislikes. But as I thought about the question, actually, there are a few things that will be desk rejected. One thing in Annals is scale development. We don't do scale development. We view scales as the measure, the empirical measure to answer your research question. So, to develop a scale for some construct that is never going to broadly be used, like IQ, right, is not particularly useful. So that's not something we publish. We expect that you describe this in your method section, but that your piece of research is a substantial piece of research. The other thing we don't do is citation-based literature reviews. We all know what I mean by that, and every PhD student's first chapter is that, and then it lands on our desk as an article. That barely passes our desk, never goes to an associate editor. Why is that, you will say? Well, because it's so very shallow, I have to honestly tell you. Like looking at citation and associations and then having a few cool charts, it just doesn't do it. If we want a literature review, we're going to go to someone who's been thinking deeply about that topic for a decade or two, and we will get a much better result without any bibliometrics. And the third thing I wanted to mention is we are quite strict about the validity of your research design. We don't care about which design you use, it just has to answer the question. But there are research designs in the tourism field and beyond that are incorrect and yet routinely used. And we will not publish them. They will be desk rejected straight away. What are the main problems? Drawing causal conclusions when your research design does not permit causality. probably the single biggest mistake. Making statements about behavioral intentions in areas where behavioral intentions are known not to hold. So if I ask you about, how sustainable your behavior is, we know that your answer is probably not going to be accurate. So to have a big study that hinges upon your behavioral intentions when they are socially desirable is just not something we're interested to publish. And then there's a lot of little things, like people proudly telling us they have a convenience sample doesn't blow our mind, right? So there's just research design things that are a showstopper for us. But they are not a priori wrong or right, but it's just, if it's not allowing valid conclusions, it doesn't matter how exciting the research question is. If it doesn't pass the methodological bar, the methods expectations, the validity, then it's going to be desk rejected.
Well, the short answer for this question is quoting Professor Xu is, we're gatekeepers of quality, we're not gatekeepers of the topic. Okay, so we welcome all different kinds of topics. When we consider any desk rejection or initial screening, the general standard, I believe, about the same for all journals, low contribution, lack of novelty, methodological issues, no external validity, stuff like that. So I think that's about the same. What I want to add is a couple of things that over the years we have seen. One potential kinds of papers that concern us a little bit is that those who chose very trivial topics that are in our mind is low significance, that it doesn't necessarily answer the so what question. There are this kind of paper that is highly technical, that is purely methodology driven, but it does not necessarily applicable to the tourism. It's not necessarily unique to our field. So maybe they belong better to a methodology journal rather than just a tourism journal. There are studies who are highly kind of a contextually bound, meaning that if this is a study specifically about St. Louis high-end hotels, and that's about it, with no general contribution to the scholarship, then that's a concern. And then finally, that's for us, we usually ask ourselves, why tourism? Again, we're growing this field. And we have seen papers obviously being rejected by probably a mainstream journal that changed the cover letter and submitted to us. Recently, I attended a webinar by Jay Barney. Jay Barney is the legend in management, just in case you know or do not know, is the developer of resource theory. He used this analogy. He said that imagine yourself in a hallway that a lot of people are having all these conversations. They're in groups, and you are going to join them in the discussions. Okay, then first of all, you want to listen to what they're talking about, and then you contribute your, whatever your perspective is. And that's important to all of these discussions. So in other words, for a good tourism paper, you need to justify the relevance of your study to the tourism scholarship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next question is about theoretical versus empirical research. So this has been the recurring topic of my discussions and talks with colleagues. So the reviewers often write that this paper doesn't have solid theory underneath, and we teach our students that research can be done from the ground up. And this is when you collect the data, having a good question and trying to make sense of the data to answer the question. Or the research also can be done from the top down, right? When we have a theory, we test hypotheses based on those theories, kind of like propose new relationships between constructs and variables, and kind of like get to the answers from from that way. I would say that The feeling in the research community, at least among my colleagues, is that theory-driven papers have some preference. So hypothesis-based research has preference over the empirical driven research. So where do the journals stand on this one?
Well, first of all, we need to kind of clarify that it's not just one matter is theory versus empirical research, okay? So there are conceptual papers, there are qualitative papers, there are methodology papers that by default, usually they don't have hypothesis, right? And then in Svetlana's specific question that you and I talked a lot about, there's this issue of fundamentally is the deduction versus induction, right? That's the logic behind it, whether that's certain journal prefer a deduction-based, okay. Actually, you know what, when we prepared this, I found that it's a very timely piece recently published by Journal of Marketing, latest issue, about empirical first paper, okay? Even though it's not published on tourism management, I would still recommend you reading it. It's a very interesting paper. Basically, the idea is not necessarily brand new, the phenomenon first or theory in use, whatever you call that, but basically starting from phenomenon and then move on to, in other words, that it kind of defy or break away free from the traditional deduction-driven ideas, okay? And we agree with that. And in a way that we're not alone. In that paper, they survey the general marketing field that although a lot of academics acknowledge this kind of a bias towards deduction research, 75 of the marketing scholars prefer, when they review the paper, that they prefer a deduction approach. Why is that? Maybe it has something to do with our training, the way how to write a paper. A deduction paper tends to be, we kind of have a good template to format it, to organize it, while induction, or what they call the non-deduction paper, is a little bit innovative. But again, we are an applied field. We would encourage all different kinds of thinking. What we need to do, not only from the editor's perspective, but also from all the reviewers, all the authors, we need to collectively educate ourselves and think more broadly about what we mean by research, good research, theory, deduction versus induction. For example, that I remember when I started this career that I was highly trained by marketing, and I have this view of if for a theory, it needs to boil down to if-then generalization, okay, if you talk about science, philosophy of science. But over the years, I learned that in other fields, human geography, sociology, they may have a different definition of theory. So in other words, we need to be more open-minded about what this, but once again, to answer your question, I think there is not necessarily a preference of deduction versus induction, and all of us need to do a job and educate ourselves in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone would like to add to this? No? No?
I'll add just a smidge. I'll add a smidge. I'm looking out here, there's 4 or 5 of you that have been in my theory class, and you know what I'm going to say. So here's the thing, at least from my perspective, that unless, and you know what's coming, unless you have just sprung from the womb and you're writing your research, you have a theoretical foundation. You have a perspective. You have experiences. So to come at even grounded theory, you've got to start from somewhere. It's not that you just sort of grasp this out of the air and that you're doing this in the field. You come with a perspective, and you have to be straightforward about that perspective. So to me, there always needs to be some sort of theoretical undergirding. So there is a difference in the question. It is a 2-part question, because not every theoretical paper is automatically connected with hypotheses. So those are sort of 2 different things. And we see many, many papers that get reviewed that do not have hypotheses. But what we do look for is some sort of framework and foundation in what you're doing. And I think that's where it's a little bit different for me, at least my perspective. And back to you.
Allow me to add one actual point, is that actually it's a very important point that Nancy just made, is that for the papers that even if you are phenomenon first, you start with the phenomenon, fundamentally it is the author's obligation to elevate that descriptive, that the findings, the observations, onto something that is more generalizable with external validity, with a more, as I mentioned, a more general contribution to the scholarship. So it's not just you starting from the phenomenon and just stay there. Eventually, you need to elevate that into something that is more generalizable and contributing to that. Otherwise, we actually have seen a lot of great descriptive and observational studies that stay there with the data, and that will be a good consulting papers or white papers, but not necessarily good, high-quality journal articles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we could talk about this, Robert, but it's not my place to debate on this stage, okay? So I will go to the third question. So we know that different people look at and assess the same piece of research very differently. So you can get a review, the feedback from reviewers, one saying that this is a great piece or similar, like very positive, and the other one to reject. So even in this conference, when we had the committee for the best paper, committee of reviewers for the best paper submissions, we have dramatically different rankings of the 5 papers, dramatically. So my question is, how do the editors assign reviewers to papers to ensure that the review process is fair and the outcome actually reflects the merits of the paper or demerits?
And the end of that question, which is what I'll answer first, is can editors override reviewer recommendations? And the short answer is yes. And the other short answer is that in a broader scope, at the end of the day, it is the editor's decision. So then to backtrack from that, we ask reviewers specifically for specific reasons, and oftentimes it's paper by paper. So JTR, and I know there's a lot of you out here that are early career, you may not be aware, we have an editorial board format. So we have 165 people now that are on the editorial board. And part of the process that we engage in when we sign them up is not only to use ORCID, but we ask them specific questions about their research interests, their theoretical interests, their background, so that we've got a pretty detailed spreadsheet about each one of those reviewers. And so when we get a paper and it gets past the desk review phase and we're going to assign, there's generally, I would say kind of in one sense, it's a Gestalt approach because we're looking at it broadly in terms of its contribution. But we also try to select at least one reviewer who's got expertise in that methodology, preferably 2, the same with expertise in the theoretical foundation in which they use. And then we might get a third person who's got that 30,000-foot view, you like when I say that, that can look at the paper in its full form and can comment on it. And so we get those reviews back. The way the system works as well is they can indicate on a scale, first of all, whether it's, accept as is, it's fantastic, it's gold-plated, let's go, to reject. And then there's several items in between. We look at that. But then, of course, we also look at their comments. And we also, even though there's 165 of them, we've got a pretty good idea about the way in which different reviewers approach papers. And so we look at what they say specifically about each one of those papers. So you might get a middle of the road or a accept with some changes, but what that means for each of the reviewers can be kind of different. And so we assess each of those individually. And then at the end of the day, we ultimately make that decision looking across those reviewers. And yes, sometimes there's variation across the three. Sometimes there's a lot of commonality, but ultimately it's our job to interpret those, and we take that job extremely seriously so that we're able to look at each of those papers. Did I miss anything else from JTR's
Brilliant.
perspective? Well, I know that, but anything?
Anyone would like to add? No? Okay. So the next question is about ChatGPT and similar tools. So we recently received communications from Elsevier Publishing House telling the authors that basically they can use those tools, however they need to disclose. So where are the journals stay on that one?
Well, I think most publishers have now put out rules around this, and overarchingly the rules are ChatGPT can't write your paper, so ChatGPT cannot be a co-author on your paper, but you are welcome to use ChatGPT to improve your language, right? I mean, ChatGPT and similar tools are language tools. So they can write a beautiful retirement speech. Why? Because they can look at 5,000 retirement speeches online and then create a really nice language thing that does a similar thing. They are not researchers. Right? So my own little experimentation with ChatGPT, because I have a lot of engineering colleagues who absolutely love ChatGPT, but they use ChatGPT as a friend. They literally have an interaction where they ask questions, or they give them code and they ask for suggestions how to improve the code, right? That's not the kind of use I have for ChatGPT. So what I said, I don't know, this area of research, give me a summary, or I just tried a few things. And without failure, ChatGPT invented references. And that's kind of concerning, right? Now the problem, and that's a known phenomenon called AI hallucination. So it's a language model. So they know what a reference looks like. So they can just create references. So then you have to go and you have to check the validity of every reference. I had people email me saying, did you ever write that paper? And I said, no, I haven't. But actually, why are you emailing me? Why didn't you Google me, right? Anyway, so no, ChatGPT, we're not scared of ChatGPT. In fact, if it improves language of some of the manuscripts we see, it's absolutely wonderful. But you shouldn't mistake ChatGPT as a tool that can write your papers, right? You will spend more time fixing the mistakes ChatGPT made than you would just writing the paper on your own. But disclosure is important, so if you have used ChatGPT to improve language, just put that down. And then to the question, why can't ChatGPT be an author? Because one of the requirements of authorship is intellectual responsibility for the piece of work. And ChatGPT cannot take intellectual responsibility for any kind of work. So that's it. It's a big topic of conversation, but I think it's quite uncontentious. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a tool like any other tool. It's like the word spell checker if you want. You don't have to, you can just have someone spell your checking, and that's perfectly fine. So you can use it legitimately in many ways, but not as a co-author.
So the journals, do they have the capacity or ability to check whether the ChatGPT has been used in more than a spell checker?
No, I don't know that we would, no.
Okay.
Sage is developing one right now, and Turnitin.com has said that they are alpha, ready to reveal beta very soon on their version. So we'll be able to detect it, but AI is going to learn how to change it as well. So it's going to be an evolution of how that moves forward that we can't predict what would happen.
Yeah. Can I just add to that? I mean, nobody's ever asked the question, can you detect if you paid someone else to write the manuscript? Right? So we can't detect it. Nobody's ever asked, can you detect whether there's false authors listed? Well, no, we can't detect it, right? That's where research ethics comes in. Sure, you can try all these things, but if eventually you're caught, it's potentially the end of your career. So no, we can't check if someone ghost wrote it, whether it's ChatGPT or Freddy down the road.
Actually, the software has been developed, which can say with about 95% certainty whether the text has been generated by ChatGPT or similar instruments. So it is potentially possible, but probably not yet implemented and not yet. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think if you check the AI literature, I think I vaguely remember there is a kind of a term for that for ChatGPT. It's basically, I think it's stylistic parrot. Basically, it will say a lot of things nice, but it doesn't know what it's speaking. Think about that. So it generates a lot of fake references, all these things, but it puts in a format that is so official, right, and formal. So, but when you are leaving this responsibility to that rather than yourself, you're taking a huge risk in that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And now let us go to a question about anonymity of the authorship. So we all know that we do not have to disclose the names of the authors. However, sometimes authors build on their previous works and they have to cite their own work. So it sort of discloses the authorship. So what should they do? What's the best strategy around this?
Yeah, the goal is always double-blind review, right? We don't want the authors to know who's reviewing. We don't want the reviewers to know who the authors are. But in reality, we're a really small field, and often it can't be avoided. You know, if you do a data set and you say it was collected in Philadelphia, there's a good chance we know which university it came from. And you know, if you say you're from College Station, we know it's likely, you know, one of these good Aggies doing research. So there are things that happen that make it so that the double-blind review process is compromised in some manner. The goal is to have that not happen, but it happens all the time. What we assume from our editorial board is that they review a paper based on how valid the results are, how reliable they are, and what the impact is. It should have no bearing on who wrote the article. And I trust our reviewers to do that. And as Nancy said before, it's the perceived conflict of interest that you have to worry about. And we don't want at any point anyone to perceive that someone got published or did not get published based on a reviewer, or vice versa, where the reviewer is revealed and the author takes it incorrectly as well. So the goal is to not have it done. There are things that you can do as an author. If you are citing papers that aren't published yet, you can say anonymous as the author. So one big red flag is articles that are in press that people wouldn't have seen before. If you have used a database before and you've got similar methods or similar data collection, that gets to the salami slicing, which you shouldn't likely be doing in the first place, and that reduces or increases anonymity. So just be wary as an author to find ways to do it. Every once in a while, I make mistakes, and authors will reveal their names unintentionally. So maybe they leave a cover letter in, or they have a proof that they used an editor before they did it, and they have the editor's name in the back, and it said, congratulations, you've professionally edited for you, and it says their names. Our job is to reduce all of that as much as we can. And if a reviewer feels compromised where they know who they are, we will, at times, they will contact us and say, I know who wrote this, the double-blind review process isn't valid, and we just remove that reviewer and put a new one in. So I think...
Yeah, in the letter to the editor, can the author ask not to send the piece to particular reviewers?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, what is the best way to resolve conflict in the review process? So sometimes authors are very unhappy with the outcome. They find the comments of the reviewers unfair. And they see that the editors sided with the reviewers without potentially letting the author kind of like to respond. So if such a situation arises, what is the best way to go and deal with it?
So I get to answer this one too. Nancy covered a lot of it when she talked about conflict before and disclosure conflict. Our job as editors are just to make sure the paper that we are putting forward to be published are the best possible that they can be. And we have all of us have a standard of quality, and each of the journals has different requirements to be published, but that standard must be held. So the publication falls directly on each one of us as editors. So there's often times that we have 3 reviewers. 2 of them may say revise and resubmit, a third one could say reject, or vice versa. We can have 2 rejects and 1 revise and resubmit. If we look at the quality of the review, we look at what they've said, it's up to us to resolve that conflict. So we've had manuscripts, I've seen all 3 reviewers reject, and we still move it forward because the reviewers didn't find things that would make that paper not be accepted. We can also have 2 revise and resubmits and 1 reject, and if that reviewer, the reject reasons were valid, that paper can be rejected as well. So it's up to us to look at the quality of the reviews. It's also up to us to give feedback at that stage so that the authors understand why. You know, we are fortunate with JTR, with our editorial board, we get usually 3 solid reviews. Sometimes that doesn't exist. You know, sometimes we get 2 solid reviews and one's a little bit weak, and it might say, go ahead, I really love this paper, accept it as is. And the author sees that and they say, wait a second, you have a reviewer that says accept. Well, maybe the other reviewers understood the topic better. So the conflict is often seen not from the reviewer standpoint, it's from the author's standpoint. They feel slighted. And it's hard when we're accepting under 10% of papers for all 3 of these journals. So we've got to make delineations, and it's based on good science. And the higher the quality, the better chance it has of being published. And we have articles that are really good, that deserve to be published. And I love writing that. You have a great contribution. It just isn't quite a fit for JTR. I look forward to seeing those results in another journal because it just has to find its right home.
Anyone? No? All right. So the last question is suggestions for the younger authors. So for researchers who are taking their steps, maybe not the first ones, but still in the beginning of their career.
So this is sort of like a graduation speech, or like if you go, no, that's the president.
Oh, I know.
Pomp and circumstance.
Oh, yeah, that's wrong.
This is what I have to deal with. Anyway, so if you're thinking about this, or one of those inspirational posters, so I'm going to kind of just keep it kind of short and sweet. Quality over quantity. Always think in terms of quality. Always think in terms of making the contribution that you think is going to last. Create partnerships with reputable and solid colleagues. Don't rush the process. Don't rush the process. Pay attention to submission guidelines. Pay attention to reviewer comments if you are lucky enough to get a revision. So we hear the horror stories about the occasional funky review, but overall the system works. Remember, once you've published something, it's out there forever. So take the time that it takes, cover your bases. If you're not sure that whether there's conflict of interest or another ethical dilemma, seek out people that you trust and respect. Seek out the resources that Sarah collected and distributed via TriNet so that you're able to really look at it and make sure that it's the best you can do when it goes out there. And if you're unsure about that ethics issue, again, seek out folks. Also, I think I'm thinking about some of the things that we're talking about, and when we're talking about ChatGPT or some other things, I'm hearkened back to the days when Airbnb first came out. Oh, it's not going to amount to much. It's just Airbnb. It'll just be this little short corner of the world. And we saw what happened, right? You can document the explosion that is Airbnb. None of us know what's going to happen in the next, really, 3 to 5 years with ChatGPT. It's or those sorts of AI in general. It's going to explode. It's going to change. It's going to change the way we do research. It's going to change the way journals look. And I think probably sooner rather than later. And I couldn't help but think, this is my last thing, and I get off the soapbox. The commentary, which was very rich and very interesting about AI that was on TriNet, but it felt like we were applying our 20th century rules to a 21st century problem. We don't even have the rules really straight yet. And this is something that's, again, way above all our pay grades that folks at national and international levels are going to need to deal with. And so I know I'm going to be enjoying the ride and the experience, and I hope you all are too. But I really think we're at this place where things are going to change a lot in the next 3 to 5 years. So good luck.
So thank you very much, and let us give the panel the round of applause. Thank you very much. And now it is the time for questions from the audience. So we have a microphone in the middle of this room. Please, who is the first? Yeah. Can you go to that microphone? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it should work. It should work.
Hello?
Yep.
Yes, definitely works.
Oh, thanks again for the discussion. I think it's very informative, especially for emerging scholars like us. I sometimes at times feels there's a barrier to communicate or engage with journal editors. So the question is very similar to the last question that you have, is that how as emerging scholars that we can involve and engage with the journals. Sometimes it could be social media editors, or even maybe we can review the journals as such. Yeah, wanted to hear some insight. Thank you.
It's a good question, isn't it? Well, I don't know if I can question the question. Why do you need to engage with the journal in that early career stage? I'm just reflecting on my early career stages. And my engagement was of that as an author. And then especially I remember Rick started using me as a reviewer. And so I built a relationship with the journal and the editor as an author and as a reviewer. And I developed an image in the eyes of the editor. That was my engagement. I didn't do tweeting. I didn't do, actually I never met Rick until years after we established a relationship that was just through work. So I think that I'm generally not someone who recommends strategies. I think, your job is to do high quality research. And if you do that, you will position yourself well in the landscape. I think that's the most genuine answer I can give. I don't know if it's helpful, but yeah.
Nancy gave great advice earlier. She said engage with scholars that have a reputation. Hopefully a good reputation, not like mine, no. My bad, sorry. With a good reputation. And we have to realize everyone in this room is an email away. So if you have a question about research, if you want to develop a problem and understand it further, you can ask questions to anyone. So the fact that we wear this weird editor hat doesn't mean we're not approachable, but it also doesn't mean that that you have to get permission to move your career forward, but you should be asking good questions to good people, like Nancy said. So that, to me, that's how you make that. And Sarah said it right. You start as a reviewer, you get a reputation, you write a good article. Nancy and I, prerequisite to being on our editorial board is you got to have published in our journal first. And across the board, so that and it's not easy to do, but that helps get that reputation.
Well, I happily concur with everything. One thing that I would just like to re-emphasize is that in addition to be a wonderful scholar, is try to be a good reviewer. Try to support the journals. It's no easy task for any of us running a journal like Tourism Management has at least 1,900 submissions a year. If you think about all the work that it requires, until you take this role, you I realized that how much grateful I was with all the editors. But to all of us, think about that. This is our collective efforts. This is not any one's journal. This is all of us. And so be a good reviewer. Respond to review invitation in a timely manner. Complete your reviews and really put some serious thoughts and good comments there. All these things, if you keep doing all this good work, I think someday it will pay off. Thank you.
I think there was an element in this question, or maybe I read this question this way, that initially we had to submit an article, and that was it. We put the article, we put information about the authors, and basically this is it. Now we have to answer very many questions at the end, and prior to the article, first, now it is required highlights. I mean, this is a new development, relatively new. Then the graphical abstract, and I think there is a third one, which is also on kind of like suggested. So is there any value to, for example, a graphical abstracts? What journals do with those? Do they promote papers that have nice graphical abstracts with interesting graphs and or pictures? So I don't know, maybe this was kind of like the question, kind of like touching on that as well.
Well, I'm quite happy to answer because I feel strongly about videos. Some of you commented in the breaks.
Yes, the videos, the videos. Yes.
So this is all. None of this is compulsory. But what I will tell you is, it breaks my heart if I write the final acceptance letter. We have two stages. We have a conditional accept where we have a long list of things. And I can imagine as an author, you think, oh, it's accepted. Now they're nagging me with a 12-point list, right? And we're all doing it. You have a final submission list, and we all do it. But here's what breaks my heart. If you have done an absolutely brilliant piece of research, and then after years of work and 3 revisions, you think, oh, well, I can't be bothered doing a video abstract. It breaks my heart because you have just reduced your audience substantially. All right, so it depends what your aim is. If your aim in life is to have another paper on your CV, maybe that's a rational decision. But if you want to change the world, that's a highly irrational decision. Yeah? I get a lot more attention for any single video abstract I record than I get from the paper because people don't read it, right? People look at the title, at the abstract, the video abstract, the highlights, the video. Who reads the full paper anymore? Right? So to me, I think the answer is most journals don't force you to do this thing. But if you have done a brilliant piece of research that you want to have real impact, either on the thinking of other scholars or in industry, it is actually in your interest to make it available in the vastest, widest range of formats so you can achieve that impact.
Thank you very much. And we have another question. It is permanently on.
Okay. I just have a question about citations. So my university is very fixated on citations at the moment. And we have lots of internal debates about whether we play that game or not. So I just wondered from the journal's perspective, is the citation of a potential article something you even think about? And maybe if you do play that game, whether what you've seen in terms of articles that are highly cited, what are the characteristics of those articles?
I've got the mic, I'm going to talk. I absolutely dislike playing any kind of games. And I would discourage everyone from playing any types of games. If you, as a scholar, would like to have a happy 40-year career, it's not going to be by maximizing your citations. It's not going to be by choosing topics that are sexy this year so that you can max out on the citation, like let's write 10 useless COVID papers, because if we do it real quick, we're the first out, and then we're going to get a lot of citations. So when you're at your deathbed, are you going to really lie there thinking, yes, I made it to an H index of 105. Now I can die. No, you're not, right? You're gonna have to want to have some sense of meaning that you've created something that lasts beyond citations. So as a human, I would recommend to you to not game citations, but to find something meaningful you want to contribute to. And as a journal, we can say the same. We never judge on citation potential. We publish curated collection on animal ethics. Well, what do you think the citation potential is? Or on aesthetics and beauty in tourism. What do you think is the citation potential? Or on disability in tourism. We do it because we think they're cool topics. They're important topics. We want to pursue them. And that's what we're driven by. And maybe it's risky in this environment. You know, some years our impact factor will be lower. Some years it's going to be higher. But we just take the liberty to publish what we believe generates value to the community. So for me, it is heartbreaking that the whole of academia has become some kind of weird board game where everyone's collecting metrics and then posting it on social media, right? Wow, big celebration, big fireworks. I have jumped over the 1,000 citations mark. Really? And how does that matter? How does that influence anything on this planet that matters? So I would discourage you. I know it's difficult to say. We are old. We can say that, right, about each other. Not you, Robert. You're young. We are old. We are fortunate. We are fortunate that we were not facing those pressures. You are very, very unfortunate in that your employers are going to judge you by this. But you need to ask yourself, are you going to be a happy scholar if that's going to be, you know, the beacon that you're following throughout your academic career?
What she said.
Yep.
All right, so another question? Jonathan?
No, we pissed him off. He's leaving.
Oh, no, he has a question.
I have a question on Jim's topic, and that is, you know, one of the things that I find about really interesting research is that quite often it uses mixed methods and you know, it's more complex. And I often find that I'm running up against word limits on publications. So it's very difficult to fully explain a mixed methods piece or even some qualitative works in under 8,000 words. And I'm just curious, because this sort of speaks to one of the reasons that you might cut research down into the salamis, right, is so that you can deal with each element of it separately, fully. And so, yeah, I just want to put that out there as you know, is this something, you know, in terms of word limits and the complexity, you know, I think, Robert, earlier today, you said that, you know, we're expecting you to have multiple data sets to be explaining some of the things. Well, the practicality of doing that within a single article is challenging. And so I'm just curious whether anyone has points of view on that.
Yeah, we hold pretty steady to a 10,000 word limit. And one of the things I learned my first week at Texas A&M is that I could hand any sentence I wrote to John Crompton and he could take 5 words out of it and make it sound better. And we as academics become very verbose. And Sarah said it before, nobody reads your entire article, especially when it's 12,000 words. We can say things more succinct. We can get rid of repetition. When you read an article, once you've said something once, why are we saying it again? Why are you telling us 4 times that this study hasn't been done before? We heard you the first time. And 12,000 words is a lot. 10,000 words is a lot. We get too enthralled with listening to ourselves while we write. So we can do studies that have 3 or 4 experiments that are mixed methods, that are very succinct, and they're fantastic output. Once you're over that 10,000 word, we lose the quality, I believe. And I'll let the others, because that's my opinion.
Yeah, the only thing, I'm saying this slowly because now I've forgotten. Go ahead, Sarah.
All right, I'll jump in. My standard paper is 5,000 words. And that used to be the JTR norm when I was a junior academic. And still, I am the happiest to express myself in 5,000 words. Everything beyond that bores me as even the writer, okay? But what I would answer, because I acknowledge that some people need more space, and there's a beautiful thing we can do now with endless space, and that's supplementary materials, right? So there's absolutely no reason that you couldn't elaborate in detail on your methodology. In fact, if you read Nature or submit to Nature, the method section doesn't count in your word count. So you have an article that's got a word count, the methods you write for your life. So any of our journals is effectively now an online journal, so you can write as much as you want in the supplementary materials so that the richness is not lost, but you can still report your results in a succinct manner up front.
I do remember, and I'll hand it to Robert. I do remember what I was going to say, and that is we're fortunate in the fact that we've been around long enough that we're at that place too where we can cite other works and say, you know, for a complete review of the literature, go to so-and-so. And then you just pull what's relevant into what you need to do. So I think taking advantage of that is also another way to do it, but supplementary materials is excellent.
Well, I think you have all said it beautifully. I just want to add that occasionally there could be occasions that your idea needs to be expressed in a different format. It doesn't necessarily have to be a journal article. If it's really long and needs that elaboration, I think book chapters and other formats may be more suitable for those. Yeah, and I think that's in a way that we are a little bit cocoon ourselves, like everything needs to be a journal article. There are actually different ways to express ideas. Thank you.
Okay, another question?
Got one more maybe.
Yeah, please.
On conciseness, in literature reviews, you know, could you have introduction and literature reviews combined into one kind of extended introduction? You know, a lot of other disciplines don't have our long 3,000, 4,000 word literature reviews. What do you think about an introduction that actually brings in literature, right? You're making your argument, you present the theory in the introduction concisely, and then just goes right into the study. A lot of times, the literature review seems like you're regurgitating the introduction and just kind of adding it to make the reviewers happy. Thoughts on getting rid of literature reviews?
Yeah, I can. He's my PhD student, I'll answer. So, yeah, I mean, well, I can probably point to examples where we're doing that, where the introduction and lit review kind of move together. And I was looking at Jim like, isn't that what some of them do? So absolutely. Now it's got to be crafted right, and it is a little bit of a Goldilocks situation. You don't want it so short and so brief that you're not really able to express yourself, but you don't want it to go on so long that it's not really an introduction anymore. But I think you can craft it in a way. We definitely would have flexibility where that's concerned, but you still need to honor the literature and do what you need to do. Yeah.
I have something that kind of ties a bunch of this together. I reviewed, I had 3 reviewers that put a second version of a paper together, and it went from a very succinct article to almost 11,000 words. And because the author was trying to make all 3 reviewers happy, they made everything said twice, 3 times, and they reiterated and regurgitated because they assessed each one of the reviewers, and the paper lost its integrity. It was really close to being published and ended up now, I had to send a long letter to the author saying, this needs a full rewrite at a 3rd revision. And so we need to stay succinct. We need to find a way to say things shorter. The literature has to back up the paper. It's needed. It has to be theoretically grounded in some manner, whether it's inductive or deductive. Your methods have to be stated so that it can be replicated, and you got to tell us your impact. You need to spend more time on implications than we normally do, but that can be done in fewer words.
Well, I just want to add that the literary review is there not just for cosmetic purpose. I think it's there for a reason to set up your study. And just using the earlier analogies, that you're aware of what the other groups are talking about on this particular topic, and what is your unique perspective on that. how exactly to format it, there could be other different creative ways to format it. And it doesn't have to be really lengthy, but it's not there just for, like, please editor or reviewers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Another question from the audience?
I have something a little tangential to that. And that is something that I'm seeing, and I'd be interested to hear if the other editors are. We're seeing in a literature review less critique and less critique of the theory you're using. It's almost like, oh, we're not going to say anything bad about it because it's the one we used. And to me, that's a big red flag, because there's no perfect theory. And so you need to, again, show that you've read the literature, as Robert alluded to, in a way that you know the flaws of what it is that you're using, and you're aware of it up front. And I'm seeing less of that, and I'm finding myself commenting more on that when I'm doing, from the editorial perspective, to say, you know what, you really need to kind of expose your theory to the light a little bit more, and be a little more honest about it, and address it again in the conclusions as well.
All right, so any other questions? Anyone? No? All right, then we will just go one by one for the few last words, and we will conclude. Yeah? And we will conclude this session. Okay? Okay?
No, well, you get to
go.
start
Okay.
on that side.
Well, since I started with the authorship issue, I think just think about writing at least one single author piece.
I think maybe what I want to say is that I have so much enjoyed working with this group of editors. We've done quite a few things over the last year. Nancy triggered it, actually, and we're really enjoying it. And I hope what you see is that we are not competitors. Someone came to me today and said, I've sent it to one of your competitors. I'm not their competitor, right? It's just really important to understand. So all of us are a bunch of idealists who really deeply care about tourism knowledge creation. And yes, we work, but we don't. We cross over. We were all at each other's editorial boards at some point in history. So we want to help you, for all of us, to collectively push knowledge forward. This is not a game. This is not a competition. This is a joint aim. And we work together to try to achieve it, even if things get published under different journal names. But it is a big collective effort.
I look out and I see a lot of early career folks, or early to mid, and it gets me very excited. We're very excited to be all together for TTRA for the first time in several years. And my advice would be is use it to your full advantage. Every minute that you're here, take advantage of talking. We talked a lot about talk to senior folks or people that you respect, but talk to each other, because you're all at similar stages of your career, and talk about what you're doing, and share your concerns, and get to know each other, because things can happen, and before you know it, you're co-editors of a journal with somebody you talked to at a TTRA 20 years ago. So, take advantage of it. It's a beautiful thing, and we should just all be excited that we're able to be in one room together.
I got a couple things. We haven't talked about titles. Titles don't need 17 words. They do not. Make them succinct, make them sexy, solve real-world problems. Think about the problem, not the process. As grad students, you're going to watch presentations over the next few days, and people are going to talk a lot about their statistical analyses because they're in the middle of a bunch of statistics classes. Spend more time with your research problem and your implications. That's my advice.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate this panel, and let us give our guests a round of applause. And thank you very much for coming to this session. I hope that everyone got something, important and new out of this. Thank you very much. Thank you.